Making new emotion was the byproduct of trying to make sense out of planet Shenyang, with all of its cyberpunk bells and whistles, like the night market experience. I had channeled Chris Marker's style in La Jetée, just a series of video stills linked with music and narration, with both Chinese and non-Chinese non-professional actors. It was all that mattered in my world for weeks, and by the end of my contract with the school, it got me transferred into a joint venture that Pete, the American partner, was also running outside the school. In the interim, I shot some interviews and footage and cut together a short documentary about what life was like for the other teachers. They were from the US, Canada, Ireland, Australia, and the UK, and each had an interesting niche like wushu or social work. Everyone seemed to appreciate their jobs more after watching the short documentary, which featured them cinematically. But the sci-fi noir piece was better personal therapy. I'd convinced Matthew, Joelle's celebrity DJ friend, to translate and record the narration in Mandarin, and he connected me to the local TV station. Instead of finding its way into the airwaves, though, it was flat out banned. I wore this proudly as a badge of honor. The Chinese station executives, who at first thought it would make a nice propaganda piece for them to improve their street cred with the local Communist Party, responded in kind to their CCP bosses, who were shocked and jarringly disappointed at the mere mention of drug-addicted characters, regardless of the fact that the drug's effects were electronically induced in a completely fictional setting far into the future. They rescinded their initial enthusiastic reception with a hot-headed, fist-pounding, unequivocal no. I was also glad because, in their short-sighted self-congratulatory idiocy, they anticipated using John Williams' Star Wars soundtrack without fear of legal consequence. "This is China" was the first of several refrains I'd come to hear in-country as supposed excuses to cut around the sanctities of intellectual property. Fortunately, I was now free from that mess.
Maison. Douce maison. Pas de guerre. Pas de crime. Pas d'armes. Pas de bombes. Pas de tristesse. Tout le monde est heureux. Et personne ne se demande pourquoi. Nous, la famille, avons façonné cette société. Mais ce sont en réalité les satellites et les émetteurs mondiaux qui maintiennent la paix dans le monde. Seuls sommes capables de toutes les émotions, équipés dès la naissance d'un plan permanent pour résister aux signaux des émetteurs. Pourtant, afin de dompter le reste de la société, Nous générons des émissions électromagnétiques pour contrôler les schémas de pensée, des potentiels évoqués, qui sont ensuite instantanément transmis et amplifiés à travers la planète. Pourtant, les gens commencent à s'éveiller et à mourir. Les émotions soudaines, jusqu'alors inconnues, sont trop fortes pour eux. En jouant avec quelques vieux composants électroniques, quelqu'un avait accidentellement bloqué notre signal. Ils pouvaient tout ressentir. Cela valait la peine de mourir. Et cela a pris. Au début, nous pouvions tracer les signaux causés par les composants actifs, les résistances électromagnétiques, jusqu'à un emplacement précis. Personne n'était en sécurité. Mais ils ont fini par comprendre et ont commencé à utiliser des brouilleurs. Ceux qui survivent souffrent généralement de folie et s'éloignent de leurs amis et de leurs familles qui ne les comprennent pas. Personne ne sait où ils vont et personne ne semble s'en soucier. J'accepte la mission. Je me déplace comme une ombre dans une lumière mouvante, suivant toujours dans des directions différentes selon l'attention que j'attire. D'une manière ou d'une autre, il semble que je trouverai plus qu'un simple numéro manquant. Je trouverai quelque chose de familier. Les visages deviennent des miroirs. Et plus j'avance, plus je perçois un but différent, peut être interdit. Comment t'appelles-tu ? Comme demander à la ville, on ne peut que deviner ce que savent les ombres. Les émotions exigent de la responsabilité, tout comme la liberté. Le public étant débarrassé de la peur, de la colère, de l'envie, de la haine et même de la solitude, la paix et la sécurité sont assurées. Je parviens à retrouver la trace du fabricant des résistants électromagnétiques à une adresse du district de Shenhe. Je commence par lui retirer son chapeau qui cache un brouilleur protecteur. Mais je ne m'attends pas à elle, cette nouvelle émotion. Malgré mon entraînement, j'échoue. Je veux échouer et elle abandonne son brouilleur. Je retrouve son signal, la nouvelle émotion à nouveau. La famille soupçonne, mais je suis déjà trop distant. Maintenant, je suis celui qui est surveillé, une menace pour la paix mondiale. J'ai rejoint les toxicomanes. Je leur montre un implant protecteur, une monnaie d'échange, pour la retrouver en vain. J'ai tout perdu pour la retrouver, tandis que, discrètement, j'ai commencé à me trouver moi-même. J'ignore si mon choix d'échouer lui a ouvert la porte et la révolution qui s'ensuit. Bientôt, le monde reprend vie.
Pete sat next to me at one of Sophie's heavy wooden tables, tie loosened on his executive suit, his hand resting in the handle of a fresh draft beer. He'd made up his mind to send me to Beijing, to run sales for a corporate training arm of the English school. He'd made inroads at the U.S. Embassy to train some of their staff, and was looking to close the grip even tighter.
About a week later, after he finishes his last class, you'll share the apartment in Beijing with Potter. But I'm giving you the first week alone so you can get your head around the place.
Andy Potter, my future housemate, was a lanky Brit with a happy-go-lucky attitude that never seemed to trespass on professionalism. He was also the European favorite of the company, just the right mix of handsome and mellow to stay above whatever a foreign country could throw at him. Pete leaned back in his chair, raised his glass, another cue for me to raise mine.
I need you to be an asshole,
he said. A salesman, I nodded, and downed most of what was in my glass. As it turned out, in no version of me was I ever a salesman, but what the hell did I care? I was going to Beijing. By now, internet chat rooms had started taking up a pretty firm route to smooth out introductions before any real-world face-to-face. ICQ was already popular, but Yahoo Chat was a great way to find people by location. I started looking for anyone in Beijing who could make the transition easier. The winning bet seemed to fall on a young Swiss junior trade executive named Liz, who'd managed to pull a local favor to settle into a hutong at Beijing's Ground Zero, a local-styled house with a courtyard where she really could make the claim to be Hu Jintao's neighbor. July 6, 2002, 12:11 a.m., Yugong Yishan Club, Beijing. Bao Luo's shaved head was barely visible from the back of the basement, now converted into a makeshift performance space, as she screamed into the mic, jumping and leaping back and forth across the stage, dressed in a flowing white silk robe and long faded navy blue scarf. Helena Mann, on the other hand, had the advantage of height, especially as a photographer, clicking away through the colored lights and cigarette smoke. The spiked mohawks, piercings, and worn leather over ripped tees could not hide the fact that the sound system was painfully subpar. But after enough baijiu and cheap beer, there were few who cared. Maintaining a presence was a noble enough achievement, as a witness to musical and cultural history that no one suspected would be drowned out by the rabid nationalism that would swallow the country a mere decade later. Bao Luo finished her set amid lingering spectators hoping for an interaction. She calmly placed the corded mic onto a speaker for someone else to take care of, as Helena approached, quickly shouldering her way forward.
Are you free for an interview? I'm freelance, but the interview is for Reuters,
Helena said, her tall European model frame all the more striking as she spoke perfect Mandarin. Bao Luo turned, looking up, and smiled.
Oh, your Chinese is very good. I have a little time.
Bao Luo looked across the room at Su Fang, her musical partner, working on a new album, as he beckoned. Helena snapped a few more quick shots and put her camera down, picking up a digital recorder.
We are going to eat now, but of course you can come with us,
she said, walking upstairs to the exit. Helena followed her to a taxi waiting outside, where Su Fang was already inside. In a country that had amalgamated the memory of starvation into its culinary culture from the days of the Cultural Revolution, the mere act of food consumption carried a celebratory caveat, no matter how barely noticeable. Have you eaten? Was the Chinese version of how are you doing, often used by men as a conversation opener to new romantic prospects, and carried over into the whole psychology of running a restaurant. It was something that Bao Luo hoped Helena understood as they finally sat down in Wangjing, near Bao Luo's own apartment. Above the table near the door, a television carried a broadcast of another female singer, crooning Communist Party anthems, her televised image fading in and out between cross dissolves of fields of grain, a slow-moving train, and the yellow hammer and sickle fluttering on a flag in slow-motion, low-resolution blurs.
If you want to be famous in China, this is what you have to do.
Paolo observed, as Helena snapped more photos, inspired by the otherwise lurid lighting. Paolo had noticed a couple who were now leaving. Her gaze on them prodded Helena to also turn and look, catching sight of the couple as they left.
There are many North Koreans living here.
Paolo commented, and Helena turned her attention back to the conversation.
Do you know any?
Helena asked, putting her camera aside to scoop up what rice was left with her chopsticks.
I don't know any, but maybe a neighbor is. But you cannot talk to them. Talking is very difficult.
Paolo said, picking up a glass of beer to wash down her dinner.
I will show you the apartment. Where Su Fang, where we make music.
The 20th floor hallway was bare concrete, barely finished, a true liminal space which seemed par for the course, given China's massive rate of growth that saw skyscrapers punch through the skyline in record time. Inside Paolo's apartment, the world was different. A row of percussive instruments, including a Turkish doumbek, a darbuka, an African piano, an ancient 17-piped Chinese sheng, and a Japanese pellet drum sat on a light beige carpet underneath the large living room window. The apartment was essentially one large room, with no walls except for a corner hall leading to a kitchen and bathroom. Paolo's queen bed sat close to the floor, disheveled sheets and pillows, next to a single keyboard with large headphones hanging on a stand. Enough luxury for one and lots of room still for a recording and rehearsal studio for two.
Those instruments, are you moving into world music?
Asked Helena. Paolo froze, her scarf still in hand, and turned to Helena. Paolo laughed as she told Helena that she was psychic. Her infectious laugh filled the room, just as Su Fang knocked on the door. Paolo opened it, letting Su Fang in, and Paolo tossed her scarf with finality onto the bed, making her way over to her stereo system, black and multi-layered, not unlike her own approach to music.
I want you to hear this. Su Fang and I have been trying, 4AD. I like that sound very much.
Helena sat on the edge of the sofa as Paolo squatted over the controls, popping in a CD.
No, it's not.
Protested Su Fang, turning around at the window.
She's making us famous,
said Paolo with a smile, pressing play, as Helena opened the sliding door to the balcony. Outside, the first hint of dawn began to reveal the few pedestrians, and one North Korean man in his 50s on a balcony 2 rooms to the left, holding a steaming cup of tea, staring at the sky, eyes full of dreams. An American man in a suit appeared briefly behind him, then disappeared back inside. July 7th, 2002, 2:52 p.m., train from Shenyang to Beijing. By the time I'd sat down, I'd confirmed a date with Liz at a bar on the lake in Hohai, locally branded as a much-desired meeting place for lovers. Liz was heading to Singapore on a business trip and needed a house sitter. She said it was difficult to find someone she could trust, and I didn't ask her why her favor fell on a stranger she met in an online chat room. I also didn't mention I'd already had a place set up through my own company, but learning to keep options open was not only prudent in a variable rich environment like China, but a habit I'd learned as it usually paid off. Liz had acquired the rental, normally off limits to foreigners, through a special favor and connection with the local landlady. And being a neighbor of the Chinese premier, like her, I would have to keep the nature of my presence there on the extreme down low. On the train heading south, the smell of cigarette smoke long baked into the upholstery, mixed with the occasional 5 or 6 pairs of bare feet hanging loose on armrests or facing empty seats. But it was all worth it, I thought, as a 20-something local girl chose to take a chance by sitting down in the seat across from me. As she sat down, her long black Pantene hair swayed to one side, casually ignoring the inevitable stares. Her nose was slightly larger than average, below a pair of jaded eyes that hid stories of past shock and awe underneath a heavy sense of irony. The ease and familiarity as she now looked at me was a nice break from the zoo animal treatment I'd gotten used to on the streets of Shenyang. She spoke English fluently. It was easy to exchange numbers. By the time we'd pulled into Beijing Station, we'd gotten to know each other just barely well enough and parted ways so I could drop off my bags at the apartment arranged by Pete. We disappeared in the vast echoing chasm of murmurs and traffic. My new apartment was on the 7th floor. The freshly cleaned, furnished space was adequate for a 2-bedroom, and the view wasn't too bad, except for the smog layer that was only slightly less heavy than Shenyang's. I hadn't told the girl where I needed to be later that night, the reason I showered and put on a tailor-made dark suit and pinstriped shirt. I shoved a stack of business cards into my inside breast pocket like ammunition, ready to drop into the St. Regis Hotel for AmCham's monthly happy hour. But with another 3 hours to kill, I closed the door in the new place and rode the elevator back down. Finding a taxi outside was as easy as it should have been, and once I showed the girl's address to the driver that she had texted to my phone, I was fully comfortable letting fate take its course. The 10-minute drive to a quiet residential building was still in the metro domain, my first sense of the 5-ring layout of the urban sprawl that had evolved over centuries. The elevator ride in her apartment building was more sluggish, grittier, not unlike the ensuing tryst in her compact apartment, cluttered with clothes, cosmetics, and gadgets she'd grown too tired to manage. By the time she emerged from her shower almost an hour later, I realized I was being taken advantage of here. The slow erosion of morality hit just as she casually commented that she needed to leave for an appointment, but she offered to let me tag along so she could introduce me to Sanlitun, a place where I could find many other foreigners to mix with. Sanlitun was a natural byproduct of Embassy Row. Liz told me that Quentin Tarantino was still in town filming Kill Bill. I hadn't been able to make much of Beijing, let alone who or where I could get a better view, but the name of a bar called Public Space was also already mentioned. My train date and I stepped out of the taxi onto a busy corner and headed onto Sanlitun South Street and ventured onto a broad pathway crowded with bars and bar-goers, Chinese and foreign alike. I unironically followed her into a dive called Pure Girl, where her appointment was already seated with a bottle of Yanjing, the safest bet in this particularly unregulated set of circumstances. Her appointment's name was Cal, a 40-ish Canadian transplant who'd also arrived as a consultant in Beijing's pre-Olympic corporate maelstrom. He'd just come off work, still wearing the suit, but without the tie. Cal had already landed some stability as a valuable resource for Chinese companies that were looking to maintain linguistic legitimacy. His professionally close-cropped hair and well-cultured working-man countenance offset an otherwise hard-edged appearance. In a movie, I would have cast him as a security professional. Cal was the first person I shook hands and exchanged business cards with. The girl courteously excused herself for the moment to freshen up, and I sat down and ordered a Heineken to learn what I could from Cal, who is already a much more relatable source about what the hell this place Beijing was all about. By the time the girl returned a few minutes later, Cal and I had gone so far in conversation that she lapsed into disinterest, since she and I had relegated this date to a second. No sooner had she decided to renege on whatever date she had with Cal, that Cal was now going to take me on a drinking tour introduction of Sanlitun, the place that had gained so much notoriety as a Disneyland for foreigners. By the time his short walking tour ended, I knew where to go if I wanted to meet foreign girls, where to get the cheapest and most dangerous booze, and what stayed open the latest. I cut things short so I could make that long-awaited engagement at Hohai to finally meet Liz, and promised to stay in touch with Cal, thanking him for the crash course in fast friendship. Then after that, it was off to the St. Regis to sell corporate training packages. July 7th, 2002, 6:17 p.m., Hohai, Beijing. I walked over a short stone bridge decorated with dragon heads, following Liz's highly detailed directions to a bar on the other side. The summer sun had already descended into dusk. Hohai was popular because the insulation it provided from the busy urban noise beyond the trees favored a more intimate atmosphere, but the otherwise tranquil walks along the lake were already being spoiled by the bars which had begun popping up along the way. Liz was already sipping a cocktail. She was the only non-Chinese there, reclining in a wicker chair by the water. Liz wasn't as attractive as her photo, but like Cal, she was infinitely more preferable as a way to understand the way of things in Beijing, something underlined by her ability to gain residence so close to the leader of the entire country. I sat down and she smiled as if pleasantly relieved. Liz was a well-educated European, someone who was light years beyond any local capacity to understand the kind of cultural foibles a guy from New York might be carrying. Liz was, if nothing else, someone I could really talk to.
How was your trip?
She asked, running routine pleasantries as she sipped a dark liquor from a short, fat, round glass. All I could muster in response was, tiring. Liz nodded slowly and smiled, picking up her glass to drink again. She seemed more invested in the moment than I was, having already been locked into what seemed a much faster track since I left the train. A teenage waitress approached and stood by the table.
Do you want a drink?
Liz asked. I'm good, I said, still swimming from the Heineken with Cal. Liz's smile and Edenic countenance slightly faded, and she promptly dispatched the waitress for the check with a few words in Mandarin. She turned back to me.
You'll need to use Mandarin here at least as much as in Shenyang,
she said. Yeah, well, I have the basics down, like food and directions, but I guess the rest is, pretty much osmosis. The check came faster than the drinks, apparently, and Liz suddenly appeared as though she couldn't wait to leave.
So, you want to see the place?
Absolutely, I said, confident with keeping things all business, to lock in that trust she'd already put on the table. We stepped out of yet another taxi into a quiet, well-kept street lined with trees which blended artfully into the dark gray studded rooftops of the neighborhood, echoing thousands of years of tradition, still maintained and well manicured in the midst of an age of electric light speed development. On my first day, I was already moving into the Forbidden City, an escape from the corporate roof. July 7th, 2002, 8:20 p.m., Forbidden City. Liz closed the aging wooden double doors and walked me across the even older small courtyard to her own door, above a couple of steps. In the winter, she kept a coal oven burning for heat in the front corner of her small living room, sending her own contribution of black smoke pouring through a vent that poked directly through the roof. She walked me through its operation, which required a pair of cast iron tongs. The small courtyard outside, which she shared with her neighbors, was, again, a perk she maintained under condition of keeping a low profile and regular sweeping. Finished with her walkthrough, she lazily collapsed on her bed, adjacent to the living room, which was delineated by only red and orange chiffon curtains. The moment, amplified by romantic wrecks back in the U.S. right up to the day, forced me into retreat. I stood with Liz outside under the evening air and gave her a kiss on the cheek and a hug, a heartfelt thank you. Now that I was set up with a place to myself, even if I didn't need it, it was finally my time to get to work. The St. Regis, venue for the most powerful international visitors to Beijing, was the only option for the American Chamber of Commerce to hold its monthly mixers, and the very first choice for Pete to send me into battle. Already primed from that wholly organic introduction to Beijing, which concluded only 30 minutes prior, I leaned on another bar, a deep contrast with the dive called Pure Girl. The Jack and Coke was quick to arrive, giving me just enough room to breathe before I loosened my tie to put sales prospects and myself at ease. I think people avoided me because they sensed how much I hated being a salesperson. I tossed 200 kuai into the bar for the drink and turned back to the scattered engagements of after-work conversation. I hadn't felt this kind of social anxiety since my cubicle at JP Morgan 3 years back, senselessly braving mind-numbing drudgery of that temp assignment. Here in this room, I just punched back into work while everyone else was hell-bent on drowning it in alcohol. I was drawn mostly to the well-traveled local, someone who is a dynamic vehicle between worlds. The one I ended up speaking to had an Ivy League demeanor. Eileen Ma, the Chinese rep for the Motion Picture Association of America in this case, maintained a placid expression that wavered little as she spoke, her thin lips running tactical yet artful exchanges. Sure, I was there on behalf of my employer, no matter what anyone else wanted to think. So she wasted no time on a business card, and I returned the gesture with a card of my own. MPAA, so what exactly,
We monitor piracy,
Eileen immediately replied.
but we also work with Chinese companies to try and mitigate it and help them develop professionally so they can produce films of a quality that can compete with Hollywood so they don't have to keep pirating films. Have you been in Beijing long?
Eileen asked, seamlessly pressing on. Just got in. I'm from New York, I said.
Oh, so how are you finding Beijing? There is a lot of difference.
It was another one of those, do you like Chinese food questions, even happening here, and I wasn't quick enough to answer.
Maybe I can show you a few things,
She said.
if you haven't discovered much of it yet.
I wasn't going to resist wherever these jumps were taking me. I just hoped they would help me make sense of the mysterious buzzing noise I'd landed in, and maybe take it from there. I just finished that thought when another prospect caught my eye from across the room. This time she was blonde, probably Canadian. I would really like to continue this, but if I don't get at least 15 business cards from tonight, my boss is going to fire me, I said. It's been an unexpected pleasure, though, and I checked her business card for a cell number. Can I call you tomorrow? I asked.
Tomorrow I have a previous engagement, but Sunday I am free.
I took another sip from my glass and courteously shook Eileen's hand again before walking past her, only to find an empty corner with a potted fern where the blonde once stood. I pretended I'd meant to go there to get around the crowd, then veered off to another group of people for some light conversation. Never did see that blonde again until maybe 100 business cards later. I decided to walk off the alcohol and make use of my time to explore some more of Beijing. Wandering along a street with that lost look on my face was much more of an invitation to engagement. A woman on a bicycle approached and stopped, her pleasant visage complemented by the ease of her English. It was a good time to get to me, while I was still on the green, not caring that she was obviously feeling me out to see how much money I was willing to part with that night. She stepped off her bicycle to walk with me instead, corralling me into the Hard Rock Cafe, where no drugs or nuclear weapons were allowed. There was a Filipino band there too, cranking out gutsy Rolling Stones covers. The girl with the bicycle had left her transportation outside in order to introduce me to a friend. The friendliness always had a price, no matter where you ended up, but especially here. I just made sure it never went past a couple of drinks and some appetizers. Pulling the two women along as all I needed was a little more fuel to break the spell of alcohol from the past couple of hours. But the tour wasn't over yet. The two of them looked at each other and smiled as they schemed, finally dropping a prospect to end the night at yet another would-be pickup joint. It wasn't that far to the south gate of Urtan Park where they finally brought me. I noticed a red neon sign that was strangely darker red, almost like blood. Maggie's bar beckoned through the trees that couldn't hide it fully, like how lingerie works on the right kind of woman. We turned up a pathway that led to a stone bridge, and it suddenly felt like Halloween. Smoke, slow remnant smoke, floated from the water, the whole scene decorated with fallen, dead leaves. A werewolf howling in the distance wouldn't have been much of a surprise. They led me across the bridge. Closer to the entrance, another figure, right out of a Frank Frazetta fantasy, lingered by the front entrance door. She beckoned, and I was inside. There was no music, only a full gallery of women, each one dressed in her own unique version of allure, mostly all sitting at the semi-oval bar across from the entrance. They all turned their heads and looked at me, all at once, except for one guy in the midst of them, his shiny gray tie loosened, tending grudgingly to a drink that could have been his last. I took the absence of music and noise to mean the place was closed, and, to the grand disappointment of my two hosts, backed out the door. My walk away from them turned into a jog back over the bridge. I didn't know when I'd be back, but it felt like I'd just checked off something on a bucket list. Maggie's, otherwise known as the Mongolian Embassy, was Beijing's most notorious hooker bar, owned by the former head of the Public Security Bureau. No locals allowed, except the staff. It was full of Mongolian girls. Business leaders, diplomats, young foreigners looking for adventure would go there because the music was better than any other bar, they would all say. After a few days in the Forbidden City, with all its tranquility and the surrounding storm, I'd returned to the Beijing apartment that Pete had set up for me because Potter was going to be arriving. I opened the door and found Potter, who was already 3 Yanjings into a pirated DVD of The Matrix, 1 week early at the apartment, with a short, stocky, half-naked prostitute on the sofa. I'd arrived just in time for the neighbors to call the police on us and complain about someone playing basketball. A frantic, bothered knock interrupted the atmosphere, followed by
Police!
Bellowing through the door. It was the 3rd time I'd opened my door to the cops in China, and this time they just pushed past, everything exposed. Potter, who had apparently been making noise with his girl for the night, stood up from the sofa in a drunken daze and approached the door like Anthony Hopkins' Captain Bligh, waking up to a mutiny.
Mate, what the fuck is going on? What in the hell do you think you're doing?
Potter's disturbed, hungover British tone only brought out angry rebukes from the officers. I began dialing Pete for help. I hate calling you, but there are a couple of cops.
Hand them your phone,
snapped Pete. I gestured for the officers to listen to the phone. One of them, the clearly older one, snatched the phone and listened, handing it back with a "it's for you" satisfaction that there were going to be consequences. The officers left and closed the door, and I returned the phone to my ear. "Yeah.
You guys are done,"
Pete said. "Look, I just came back and..."
"I don't want to hear it. You got 2 weeks."
I stared at the phone, the line dead, then stared at Potter and took a deep breath. "Well, we got 2 weeks to get the fuck out of here."
Fucking hell.
I schlepped back to my room and slammed the door shut, leaving Potter alone with his hooker and half-finished beer. On the TV screen, Neo slammed back into a wall and sank into the ground, leaving a heavy blood smear on the wall.